Welcome to Dreamtime History. Tonight, we're exploring the fascinating world of the Byzantine Empire, a journey that will take you back through centuries of human experience. As you prepare to drift into sleep, picture yourself witnessing these remarkable events unfold before you. Take a moment now to create your perfect sleep environment. Dim your lights, adjust your pillows, perhaps turn on a gentle fan for that soothing background hum. Your historical journey awaits. If these deliberately boring narratives help quiet your mind and guide you to dreamland, your like and comment make a tremendous difference to our channel. Which historical periods help you sleep best? Let us know in the comments below. We read every one and use your feedback to plan future episodes. Now, take a deep breath as we travel back in time to explore the Byzantine Empire, its origins, influential figures, and lasting legacy. Our story begins not with a beginning, but with a continuation. As the Western Roman Empire faced mounting pressures and gradual decline in the 4th and 5th centuries, its eastern counterpart was flourishing. This eastern half of the Roman world would eventually become what historians call the Byzantine Empire, though its inhabitants simply called themselves Romans, Romaioi in their Greek tongue, for the entire 1,000-year span of their civilization. To understand the Byzantine Empire, we must first journey to a small Greek settlement called Byzantium, situated on a peninsula where Europe and Asia nearly touch, commanding the narrow strait known as the Bosporus. This strategic location, connecting the Black Sea to the Mediterranean, had been important since ancient times. But it was in the year 324 CE that the Roman Emperor Constantine decided to transform this modest settlement into a new imperial capital. Constantine had emerged victorious from civil wars that had divided the Roman Empire and now sought to establish a new capital, one untainted by Rome's pagan past and situated more centrally within the empire's vast territories. The site of Byzantium appealed to him because of its defensive position, surrounded by water on 3 sides, and its commercial potential as a crossroads of maritime trade routes. Imagine, if you will, the landscape of ancient Byzantium, rolling hills overlooking sparkling blue waters, fishing boats bobbing gently in natural harbors, the distant shores of another continent visible across the strait. This was the canvas upon which Constantine would create his masterpiece, a city that would come to be known as Constantinople, or the City of Constantine. The transformation of Byzantium into Constantinople was no small undertaking. Constantine spared no expense in his desire to create a new Rome worthy of imperial grandeur. Architects, artisans, and laborers from across the empire were summoned to build massive walls, forums, palaces, and churches. Constantinople was laid out on the model of Rome with 7 hills, public squares, and broad avenues. To populate his new capital, Constantine offered incentives to nobles and merchants who would relocate from other parts of the empire, particularly from Rome itself. Tax breaks, free bread, and the promise of new opportunities drew many to this emerging center of power and wealth. On May 11, 330 CE, Constantinople was officially dedicated. In a grand ceremony blending Christian and traditional Roman elements, Constantine consecrated his new city. Though the details of this ceremony have been somewhat lost to history, we know that Constantine processed through the streets and that the city's protection was entrusted not to the traditional Roman deities, but to the Christian God and the Virgin Mary, reflecting Constantine's own conversion to Christianity. The establishment of Constantinople as a Christian capital marked an important transition in the Roman world. While the old city of Rome remained steeped in its pagan traditions and physical monuments to the old gods, Constantinople emerged as a fundamentally Christian city. Churches, not temples, dominated its skyline, and Christian symbols were incorporated into its public spaces and official iconography. Of course, this transition did not happen overnight. The Christianization of the Roman Empire was a gradual process that would continue for centuries. During Constantine's time, Christians were still a minority, even if an increasingly favored one. Many traditional Roman practices and cultural elements persisted alongside the new faith. Let us pause for a moment to consider the wider historical context of this period. As Constantine was building his new capital in the East, the Roman Empire as a whole was undergoing profound changes. The economy was shifting, with gold replacing traditional silver coinage. Administrative reforms were centralizing power in the hands of the emperor and his direct appointees. And most significantly, the northern and western frontiers of the empire were facing increasing pressure from various peoples who the Romans collectively termed barbarians. After Constantine's death in 337 CE, the empire was divided among his sons, beginning a period of dynastic struggles and religious controversies. These internal conflicts weakened the empire's ability to respond effectively to external threats, particularly in the West. By the late 4th century, the division between eastern and western halves of the Roman Empire had become more pronounced. In 395 CE, upon the death of Emperor Theodosius I, the empire was formally divided between his sons. Arcadius received the east, with Constantinople as its capital, while Honorius took the west, ruling from Milan and later Ravenna, as Rome itself had become strategically vulnerable. This division, initially intended as an administrative convenience, would prove permanent. While the two halves of the empire still theoretically constituted a single state, in practice, they increasingly operated as separate entities with different priorities and challenges. The Western Roman Empire, facing relentless pressure from various Germanic peoples, gradually lost control of its provinces. Britain was abandoned early in the 5th century. Spain was overrun by Visigoths. North Africa, Rome's breadbasket, fell to the Vandals. And finally, in 476 CE, the last Western Roman emperor, the unfortunately named Romulus Augustulus, was deposed by the Germanic general Odoacer. This date, 476 CE, is conventionally used to mark the fall of the Western Roman Empire, though in reality the process was much more gradual and complex. Roman institutions, laws, and culture continued to influence the Germanic kingdoms that succeeded imperial administration in the West. Meanwhile, the Eastern Roman Empire not only survived, but flourished. The East had certain advantages. It was wealthier, more urbanized, and more commercially active than the West. Its borders were somewhat more defensible, and its provinces more integrated into imperial administration. Constantinople itself, protected by its massive walls and favorable geography, remained impregnable to direct assault for centuries. It is at this point, the late 5th century, that historians traditionally begin using the term Byzantine Empire to describe the surviving Eastern Roman state. However, it's important to remember that this is a modern convention. The Byzantines themselves never used this term. They continued to call themselves Romans, and their state the Roman Empire, until its final fall in 1453 CE. As we continue our somnolent journey through Byzantine history, let us turn to the reign of one of its most significant emperors, Justinian I, who ruled from 527 to 565 CE. Justinian's ambitions and accomplishments would define the empire for centuries to come. Justinian was born in a small village in what is now North Macedonia, to a peasant family of Illyrian or Thracian origin. His rise to power came through his uncle Justin I, a soldier who had risen through the ranks to become emperor. Justinian received an excellent education in Constantinople and became his uncle's trusted advisor and eventual successor. Equally important to Justinian's story is his remarkable Empress Theodora. Unlike Justinian's humble but respectable origins, Theodora came from the world of entertainment. Her father had been a bear keeper at the Hippodrome, Constantinople's massive chariot racing venue. According to somewhat sensationalized accounts by the historian Procopius, Theodora had worked as an actress and courtesan before catching Justinian's eye. Despite opposition from conservative elements at court, Justinian married Theodora in 525 CE. When he became emperor 2 years later, she was crowned as his equal, an empress, or Augusta, with substantial power and influence. Their partnership would prove to be one of the most effective in Byzantine history. Early in Justinian's reign, Constantinople was rocked by civil unrest known as the Nika riots. In January 532 CE, what began as typical sports rivalries between the Blues and Greens, fan factions of chariot racing, escalated into a full-scale rebellion against imperial authority. For several days, much of Constantinople was burned and looted by the rioters who proclaimed a new emperor. Justinian, we are told, considered fleeing the city. It was Theodora who steadied his resolve with her famous declaration that purple makes a fine shroud, meaning that it was better to die as emperor than to live as an exile. Justinian's generals, primarily Belisarius and Narses, eventually suppressed the riots by trapping and massacring the rebels in the Hippodrome. With imperial authority restored, Justinian could begin implementing his ambitious agenda. One of Justinian's most visible legacies was his building program. The Nika riots had destroyed much of Constantinople, giving Justinian an opportunity to rebuild the city center according to a grander vision. The centerpiece of this renewal was the Hagia Sophia, or Church of Holy Wisdom, which remains one of history's greatest architectural achievements. Imagine, if you will, the wonder of entering the Hagia Sophia in the 6th century. You pass through monumental bronze doors into a vast, open space crowned by a seemingly floating dome soaring 180 feet above the floor. Light pours in through numerous windows, reflecting off gold mosaics and polished marble of various colors. The effect, as intended, is of heaven descending to earth, a fitting setting for Byzantine, imperial, and religious ceremonies. The architects of this wonder, Anthemius of Tralles and Isidore of Miletus, were not primarily builders but scholars, a mathematician and a physicist respectively. Their scientific knowledge allowed them to solve the immense engineering challenges posed by the emperor's vision. When completed in 537 CE, after just 5 years of construction, Justinian is said to have exclaimed, "Solomon, I have surpassed thee," referring to the biblical king's temple in Jerusalem. Beyond the Hagia Sophia, Justinian's building program included numerous other churches, monasteries, fortifications, bridges, aqueducts, and public buildings throughout the empire. From the desert monasteries of Sinai to the defensive walls along the Danube frontier, Justinian's architectural legacy transformed the physical landscape of the Byzantine world. Perhaps even more significant than Justinian's architectural achievements was his legal legacy. Early in his reign, Justinian appointed a commission of legal experts led by the jurist Tribonian to collect, organize, and harmonize Roman law, which had accumulated haphazardly over centuries. The result of this monumental effort was the Corpus Juris Civilis, or Body of Civil Law, completed in 534 CE. This comprehensive legal code consisted of several parts: the Codex, a collection of imperial decrees; the Digest, a compilation of juristic writings; the Institutes, a legal textbook for students; and the Novels, new laws issued during Justinian's reign. The Corpus Juris Civilis would eventually become the basis for most legal systems in continental Europe and, by extension, much of the world. Its influence extends into modern times, making it one of Justinian's most enduring accomplishments. Alongside his domestic initiatives, Justinian harbored grand geopolitical ambitions, specifically the reconquest of the Western Roman territories that had fallen under barbarian rule. Beginning in 533 CE, his talented general Belisarius led Byzantine forces to a swift victory over the Vandal kingdom in North Africa, restoring this wealthy region to imperial control. Encouraged by this success, Justinian directed his attention to Italy, which had been under Ostrogothic rule since the deposition of the last Western Roman emperor. The Gothic War, as this campaign came to be known, proved far more difficult and protracted than the African expedition. What Justinian had hoped would be a quick victory turned into a 20-year struggle, 535 to 554 CE, that devastated Italy and drained Byzantine resources. While Byzantine forces eventually prevailed, establishing an exarchate, a military-governed province, centered in Ravenna, the cost was enormous. Italy's population and economy were severely diminished, and the prolonged conflict left Byzantine forces weakened. Justinian also secured a foothold in southeastern Spain, but his dream of fully restoring the Mediterranean as a Roman lake remained unrealized. The reconquered territories would prove difficult to maintain in the long term, as subsequent emperors faced new threats that demanded attention elsewhere. The last years of Justinian's reign saw the empire confronting multiple challenges. A devastating outbreak of bubonic plague beginning in 541 CE, and now known as the Plague of Justinian, killed perhaps a quarter of the empire's population. This demographic catastrophe undermined both the economy and military manpower. On the eastern frontier, the Byzantines engaged in a series of inconclusive wars with their principal rival, the Sasanian Persian Empire. To the north, various Slavic peoples and steppe nomads increasingly pressured the Balkan provinces. When Justinian died in 565 CE, he left an empire that was geographically larger but financially strained and militarily stretched. His successors would struggle to maintain his extensive commitments with diminished resources. The immediate post-Justinian era saw the empire gradually retrenching. Under Emperor Maurice, reigned 582 to 602 CE, the Byzantines achieved a favorable peace with Persia that allowed them to focus on the deteriorating situation in the Balkans, where Slavic peoples were settling in increasing numbers. Maurice's attempts to address these challenges through military reforms were cut short by his overthrow and execution in a military coup led by a centurion named Phocas. This violent transition destabilized the empire at a critical moment and provided an opening for external enemies. The usurper Phocas ruled for 8 bloody years, 602 to 610 CE, before being overthrown in turn by Heraclius, the son of the exarch governor of Carthage. Heraclius would prove to be one of Byzantium's most consequential emperors, though he inherited an empire in crisis. Almost immediately upon Heraclius's accession, the Sasanian Persians launched a major offensive against Byzantine territories. Over the next decade, Persian forces overran Syria, Palestine, Egypt, and much of Anatolia, the core provinces of the Eastern Roman Empire. Jerusalem fell in 614 CE, and the True Cross, the empire's most sacred relic believed to be the actual cross upon which Jesus was crucified, was carried off to Persia as a trophy. Simultaneously, various Slavic peoples and the nomadic Avars were raiding deep into the Balkans, at times threatening Constantinople itself. By 618 CE, the Byzantine Empire had been reduced to little more than the capital city and scattered territories. The situation appeared hopeless. Yet, Heraclius refused to abandon the struggle. In a bold gambit, he reorganized the remaining imperial resources for a counteroffensive. Gathering a new army and securing the capital's defenses, Heraclius personally led a series of campaigns deep into Persian territory during the 620 CE. These campaigns culminated in a decisive Byzantine victory at the Battle of Nineveh in 627 CE. The Persian king was subsequently overthrown in a palace coup, and his successor hastily made peace with Byzantium, returning all occupied territories and sacred relics, including the True Cross. Heraclius's triumph was celebrated as a miraculous delivery, seemingly confirming divine favor for the Christian empire. However, this victory would prove short-lived, as a new and unexpected threat was emerging from the Arabian Peninsula. Let us pause here and reflect on the Byzantine Empire at this pivotal moment in the early 7th century. Although Heraclius had successfully preserved the empire against seemingly insurmountable odds, the long Persian War had exhausted Byzantine resources and permanently altered the empire's character. The elaborate court ceremonies and bureaucratic structures of Justinian's era had given way to a more militarized state focused on survival. Provincial administration was increasingly organized around themes. Military districts where soldiers were granted land in exchange for hereditary service. The common language of administration was shifting from Latin to Greek, reflecting the empire's increasingly Eastern orientation. Byzantine society in this period was deeply hierarchical, with a clear distinction between honestiores, the privileged classes, and humiliores, common people. At the apex stood the emperor, considered God's viceroy on earth, whose sacred person was surrounded by elaborate ceremonial meant to reflect heavenly order. Below the emperor were various court officials, provincial governors, military commanders, and the clergy, all part of a complex administrative apparatus that governed imperial affairs. Constantinople itself remained a marvel of urban planning by medieval standards, with a population that may have approached 500,000 during its height under Justinian, though this number had likely decreased by Heraclius's time. The capital featured numerous amenities that were increasingly rare in other medieval cities: public baths, a complex water supply system, regular grain distributions, and the massive hippodrome where citizens could watch chariot races and other entertainments. The city's markets offered goods from across the known world: silks from China, spices from India, furs from the Slavic lands, and ivory from Africa. Beyond Constantinople, the imperial economy was primarily agricultural, with most of the population engaged in farming. However, Byzantine cities maintained a level of commercial activity and specialized manufacturing that exceeded most of their Western European counterparts. Particularly renowned were Byzantine textiles, especially the purple-dyed silks that were reserved for imperial use, and the intricate gold jewelry and enamels produced by court workshops. The Byzantine Church, essentially indistinguishable from the state at this time, played a central role in daily life. Religious observances structured the calendar with numerous feast days and processions. Monasteries served not only spiritual functions, but also acted as centers of learning, charity, and sometimes political influence. Byzantine art and architecture of this period is characterized by a distinctive aesthetic that combined classical Roman elements with Christian symbolism and Eastern influences. In mosaics, ivory carvings, illuminated manuscripts, and architectural decoration, Byzantine artists developed a style that emphasized spiritual meaning over naturalistic representation. Gold backgrounds in mosaics and paintings represented the unchanging divine light. Figures were rendered with large, expressive eyes to serve as windows to the soul. Proportions were sometimes deliberately distorted to emphasize spiritual over physical reality. This distinctive artistic tradition would continue to evolve over the empire's long history, influencing artistic developments in Eastern Europe, the Islamic world, and to some extent, Western Europe. As we continue our journey through Byzantine history in the coming sections, we will explore how this civilization responded to new challenges, particularly the rise of Islam, and how it evolved over the subsequent centuries. We'll examine the iconoclastic controversies that tore at the empire's religious fabric, the cultural flowering of the Macedonian Renaissance, the bitter split between Eastern and Western Christianity, the catastrophe of the Fourth Crusade, and the long, gradual decline that culminated in the fall of Constantinople to the Ottoman Turks in 1453 CE. But for now, as our minds drift along the flowing currents of historical time, let us pause and contemplate the enduring image of Byzantium in its early glory. The golden domes and soaring architecture of Constantinople, the intricate court ceremonies that mirrored cosmic order, the delicate balance of power between emperor and church, and the profound synthesis of Roman governance, Greek culture, and Christian faith that define this remarkable civilization. As time passed and as the empire continued to evolve throughout the 7th century, the Byzantine world was about to face perhaps its greatest challenge yet. As we continue our journey through the history of the Byzantine Empire, as our journey through the history of the Byzantine Empire continues, we find ourselves in the 7th century at a moment when the empire faced perhaps its most significant challenge yet. Having just emerged from the exhausting conflict with Sasanian Persia, Byzantium would soon confront a new and unexpected force emerging from the Arabian Peninsula. In the 630s CE, just a few years after Heraclius' triumph over the Persians, Arab armies inspired by the new religion of Islam began expanding beyond their homeland. The Byzantine provinces of Syria and Palestine, still recovering from the Persian occupation, were particularly vulnerable. The Battle of Yarmouk in 636 CE marked a decisive defeat for Byzantine forces. Within a few years, Syria, Palestine, and Egypt, some of the empire's wealthiest and most culturally significant provinces, had fallen under Arab control. Alexandria, the great center of Hellenistic learning and second city of the Byzantine Empire, surrendered in 642 CE. These losses were devastating both materially and psychologically. Egypt had been the empire's breadbasket, providing grain to feed Constantinople. Syria and Palestine contained many of Christianity's holiest sites, including Jerusalem. Moreover, these provinces had been part of the Roman world for centuries, deeply integrated into its cultural and administrative fabric. The rapid success of Arab arms presented a theological challenge as well. In the Byzantine worldview, military victory was seen as evidence of divine favor. The loss of so much territory to non-Christian forces raised troubling questions about God's relationship with the empire that considered itself the earthly reflection of the heavenly kingdom. Some Byzantine thinkers interpreted these calamities as divine punishment for sins, particularly what some viewed as improper veneration of religious images or icons. This interpretation would later contribute to the iconoclastic controversies that would divide Byzantine society. As the 7th century progressed, the Byzantines gradually adapted to their new, reduced circumstances. The empire essentially retreated to its Greek-speaking core: Constantinople, Anatolia, modern Turkey, parts of the Balkans, and scattered outposts in Italy, Sicily, and North Africa. This territorial contraction accelerated changes already underway in Byzantine administration and culture. The empire became more thoroughly Greek in its language and identity, though it continued to call itself Roman. Latin, which had been the language of law and administration, gradually gave way to Greek in all official contexts. The theme system, initially developed under Heraclius, became the foundation of Byzantine provincial administration. These themes were military districts, each commanded by a strategos general who held both civil and military authority. Soldiers were granted land within these themes in exchange for hereditary military service, creating a class of farmer soldiers who formed the backbone of Byzantine defenses. This system helped the empire maintain a relatively large army without the enormous expense of paying full-time professional soldiers. It also strengthened provincial defense by giving local commanders and troops a personal stake in protecting their own lands from enemy incursions. The 7th and 8th centuries saw continued pressure on Byzantine frontiers. Arab forces made regular attempts to capture Constantinople itself, mounting major sieges in 674 to 678 CE and again in 717 to 718 CE. Both times the city's massive walls and the Byzantine naval weapon known as Greek fire, a mysterious incendiary substance that could burn even on water, proved decisive in repelling the attackers. Meanwhile, in the Balkans, a Turkic nomadic people called the Bulgars established a powerful state that would alternate between being a dangerous enemy and an uneasy ally of Byzantium. The Byzantine-Bulgarian relationship would remain complex for centuries, with periods of warfare interspersed with cultural and religious influence. By the early 8th century, the Byzantine Empire had stabilized somewhat after the shocks of the previous century. Under the Isaurian dynasty, particularly Emperor Leo III, reigned 717 to 741 CE, and his son Constantine V, reigned 741 to 775 CE, the empire regained some military initiative against both Arabs and Bulgars. However, this period also saw the emergence of one of the most divisive religious controversies in Byzantine history: iconoclasm, or the rejection and destruction of religious images. The veneration of icons, sacred images of Christ, the Virgin Mary, and saints, had become increasingly central to Byzantine religious practice. Icons were believed to serve as windows to the divine, allowing worshipers to connect with the holy persons depicted. They adorned churches, homes, and public spaces, and were carried in processions and into battle. In 726 CE, Emperor Leo III issued an edict against icons, ordering the removal of a particularly venerated image of Christ from the Chalk Gate, the ceremonial entrance to the Imperial Palace in Constantinople. This action marked the beginning of the iconoclastic period during which the creation and veneration of religious images were officially prohibited. The motivations behind iconoclasm were complex. Leo and his supporters argued that the veneration of icons constituted idolatry forbidden by biblical commandments against graven images. They may also have been influenced by contact with Islamic prohibitions against religious imagery. Some scholars have suggested that iconoclasm was partly an attempt to remove a source of tension with the Muslim world and potentially facilitate the reconquest of lost provinces. Others have seen iconoclasm as primarily a political move to assert imperial authority over the church, which had become a powerful and somewhat independent institution. By attacking a practice dear to many monks and common people, the emperor could demonstrate his supremacy in religious matters. Whatever the motivations, iconoclasm prompted fierce resistance. Defenders of icons or iconodules argued that since Christ had taken human form, he could and should be depicted in art. Icons, they maintained, were not idols but educational tools that helped the faithful contemplate divine mysteries. The controversy divided Byzantine society, with the imperial court and army generally supporting iconoclasm, while monks, much of the civilian population, and significantly the papacy in Rome supported the veneration of icons. Constantine V pursued iconoclasm with particular vigor, convening a church council in 754 C that condemned icons and ordering the whitewashing of church frescoes and the destruction of sacred images. Monasteries, as centers of icon veneration, faced particular persecution during his reign. The first phase of iconoclasm ended in 787 CE, when Empress Irene, serving as regent for her young son Constantine VI, convened the Second Council of Nicaea, which restored the veneration of icons as orthodox practice. However, the controversy would flare up again in the early 9th century before being definitively resolved in 843 CE, when Empress Theodora permanently restored icon veneration. This final restoration, celebrated as the triumph of orthodoxy, remains an important feast in the Eastern Orthodox Church calendar. The controversy left a lasting impact on Byzantine art, theology, and church-state relations. The resolution of the iconoclastic controversy coincided roughly with the beginning of a new imperial dynasty. The Macedonian line, founded by Basil I, who reigned from 867 to 886 CE. Under this dynasty, which would rule until 1056 CE, the Byzantine Empire would reach new heights of power, prosperity, and cultural achievement. Basil's path to the throne was unusual. Born to a peasant family in Macedonia, he came to Constantinople as a young man and found employment in the imperial stables. His extraordinary physical strength and skill with horses brought him to the attention of Emperor Michael III, who made Basil his companion and eventually co-emperor. In 867 CE, Basil had Michael assassinated and claimed the throne for himself. Despite these violent beginnings, he proved to be a capable ruler who established a dynasty that would provide the empire with nearly 2 centuries of relatively stable governance. One of Basil's most significant initiatives was a comprehensive review and revision of Roman Byzantine law, continuing the legal work begun under Justinian. The result, the Basilica, organized imperial law in more accessible Greek rather than the traditional Latin, reflecting the empire's increasingly Hellenized character. Under Basil's successors, particularly Leo the Wise, reigned 886 to 912 CE, and Constantine the Born in the Purple reigned 913 to 959 CE, the Byzantine Empire experienced a cultural and intellectual flowering known as the Macedonian Renaissance. This period saw renewed interest in classical Greek learning, the production of encyclopedias and other scholarly compilations, and the copying of ancient texts that preserve much of classical literature for future generations. The University of Constantinople, founded in the 5th century, was revitalized and attracted scholars from throughout the Byzantine world. Byzantine artistic production flourished as well, with magnificent illuminated manuscripts, ivory carvings, and cloisonné enamels demonstrating the refined aesthetic and technical mastery of imperial workshops. In architecture, the cross and square church plan became the standard, featuring a compact, harmonious design crowned by a central dome. Politically and militarily, the Macedonian era saw Byzantine power gradually expand. Under Emperor Nikephoros II Phocas, reigned 963 to 969 CE, and John I Tzimiskes, reigned 969 to 976 CE, Byzantine forces recaptured Crete, Cyprus, and parts of Syria, including the city of Antioch, from Arab control. The empire reached its medieval apogee under Emperor Basil II, known as the Bulgar Slayer, reigned 976 to 1025 CE. Basil spent much of his long reign campaigning against the Bulgarian Empire, which under Tsar Samuel had become a serious threat to Byzantine dominance in the Balkans. The conflict culminated in the Battle of Cladion in 1014 CE, where Byzantine forces decisively defeated the Bulgarians. According to later accounts, Basil ordered 99 out of every 100 captured Bulgarian soldiers to be blinded, with the 100th man left with one eye to lead his comrades home. When Samuel saw his mutilated army return, he reportedly died of shock. Whether or not this gruesome story is accurate in its details, Basil's campaigns led to the complete annexation of the Bulgarian Empire in 1018 CE. This victory, combined with successful operations against Arab emirates in the east, gave Byzantium control over the entire Balkan Peninsula and parts of the Caucasus, Armenia, and Upper Mesopotamia. By Basil's death in 1025 CE, the Byzantine Empire had reached its greatest territorial extent since the Arab conquest, with frontiers stretching from southern Italy to the Caucasus Mountains, and from the Danube River to the upper Euphrates. Equally important to this territorial expansion was the empire's cultural and religious influence beyond its borders. In the 9th and 10th centuries, Byzantine missionaries, particularly the brothers Cyril and Methodius, had brought Christianity to various Slavic peoples. Cyril and Methodius developed an alphabet, the precursor to today's Cyrillic script, to translate religious texts into Slavic languages, allowing for the spread of Byzantine Christianity, liturgy, and cultural patterns throughout Eastern Europe. This missionary work created what some historians have called the Byzantine Commonwealth, a community of Orthodox Christian states that looked to Constantinople for religious and cultural leadership. One of the most significant conversions was that of Kievan Rus, a state centered on present-day Ukraine and Western Russia. According to traditional accounts, Vladimir, the ruler of Rus, sent emissaries to investigate various religions before choosing Byzantine Christianity in 988 CE. The emissaries reportedly said of the divine liturgy they witnessed in the Hagia Sophia, "We knew not whether we were in heaven or on earth, for on earth there is no such splendor or beauty." Vladimir's conversion, whether motivated by genuine religious conviction or political calculation, established a cultural connection between Rus' and Byzantium that would have profound consequences for Russian history and identity. However, the mid-11th century marked a turning point in Byzantine fortunes. The death of Basil II without direct heirs led to a period of instability and declining military effectiveness. The empire's professional army was increasingly replaced by mercenary forces, which proved both expensive and unreliable. In 1054 CE, a significant religious split occurred when papal legates from Rome and the Patriarch of Constantinople mutually excommunicated each other, formalizing the schism between the Eastern Orthodox and Western Catholic branches of Christianity. While this event, known as the Great Schism, did not immediately affect daily religious life, it would have profound consequences for future Western Byzantine relations. The most severe blow to Byzantine power came at the Battle of Manzikert in 1071 CE. Emperor Romanos IV Diogenes led a large Byzantine army against the Seljuk Turks, who had been advancing into Byzantine territory in eastern Anatolia. The battle ended in a catastrophic Byzantine defeat, with the emperor himself captured by the Seljuk Sultan Alp Arslan. Although Romanos was treated honorably and released after agreeing to peace terms, he returned to find that he had been deposed in a palace coup. The resulting civil conflict prevented any coordinated Byzantine response to Turkish advances, and by the end of the 1070s, most of Anatolia, the heartland of Byzantine power and recruitment, had fallen under Seljuk control. This territorial loss was devastating for the empire. Anatolia had provided much of Byzantium's food, tax revenue, and military manpower. Its loss severely diminished the empire's resources and strategic depth, forcing a greater reliance on diplomacy and foreign alliances. In this context of diminished Byzantine power, Emperor Alexios I Komnenos reigned 1081 to 1118 CE, appealed to Western Europe for military assistance against the Turks. In 1195 CE, Pope Urban II responded by calling for a crusade to recover the Holy Land from Muslim control, promising spiritual rewards to those who participated. The resulting First Crusade was not precisely what Alexios had envisioned. While he had hoped for controlled military assistance that would help restore Byzantine authority in Anatolia, the crusade quickly developed its own momentum and objectives. As the Crusader armies passed through Constantinople in 1096 to 1097 CE, Alexios extracted oaths from their leaders that territories formerly belonging to the Byzantine Empire would be returned to imperial control. However, these commitments would prove difficult to enforce as the Crusaders established their own states in the Levant. Despite these complications, the First Crusade initially benefited Byzantium by weakening Turkish power in Anatolia, allowing Alexios and his successors to recover some lost territories, particularly along the Aegean coast. Under the Komnenian dynasty, 1081 to 1185 CE, the empire experienced a partial recovery in its power and prestige. John II Komnenos reigned 1118 to 1143 CE, and Manuel I Komnenos reigned 1143 to 1180 CE, were capable rulers who maintained Byzantine influence in the Balkans and Eastern Mediterranean. Manuel, in particular, pursued an ambitious foreign policy, intervening in Italy and Hungary and forming alliances against the rising power of the German Emperor Frederick Barbarossa. However, this revival proved temporary. After Manuel's death, the empire once again fell into instability. His son Alexios II was overthrown and killed by his cousin Andronikos I, whose brief, violent reign, 1183 to 1185 CE, ended when he was deposed and brutally executed during a popular uprising. The Angelid dynasty that followed proved incapable of addressing the empire's mounting problems. Under Isaac II, Angelus reigned 1185 to 1195 CE and again 1203 to 1204 CE. And his brother Alexios III reigned 1195 to 1203 CE. Imperial authority weakened, corruption increased, and the economy declined due to mismanagement and excessive tax concessions to Italian merchant republics. These internal weaknesses set the stage for one of the most traumatic events in Byzantine history, the Fourth Crusade and the Latin conquest of Constantinople. The Fourth Crusade, launched in 1202 CE, was originally intended to target Egypt, then the center of Muslim power in the Eastern Mediterranean. However, the Crusaders lacked sufficient funds to pay for the Venetian ships they had contracted to transport them. The elderly but shrewd Venetian doge, Enrico Dandolo, persuaded the Crusaders to help Venice by first attacking the Christian city of Zara on the Dalmatian coast, a commercial rival to Venice. Despite papal disapproval, the Crusaders captured Zara in November 1202 CE. Meanwhile, Alexios, the son of the deposed Byzantine Emperor Isaac II Angelos, approached the Crusade leaders with a proposition. If they helped him overthrow his uncle Alexios III and restore his father to the throne, he would provide lavish payment, military support for their crusade, and bring the Byzantine Church under papal authority. Despite some misgivings, the Crusade leaders accepted this offer, and in July 1203 CE, their fleet appeared before Constantinople. After a brief siege, Alexios III fled, allowing Isaac II to be restored to the throne with his son as co-emperor, Alexios IV. However, Alexios IV soon found that he could not fulfill his extravagant promises to the Crusaders. As he imposed new taxes and seized church property to pay them, his popularity among the Byzantine population plummeted. In January 1204 CE, he was overthrown and executed in a palace coup led by Alexios Doukas, who took the throne as Alexios V. The new emperor refused to honor his predecessor's agreements with the Crusaders and ordered them to leave Byzantine territory. Instead, the Crusade leaders decided to capture Constantinople for themselves. In April 1204 CE, after a brief siege, the Crusaders broke through the city's defenses and subjected Constantinople to 3 days of systematic looting. The sack of Constantinople in 1204 CE was a catastrophe of immense proportions for the Byzantine world. Countless treasures accumulated over 9 centuries of Byzantine history were destroyed or carried off to Western Europe. Churches and monasteries were desecrated, relics stolen, and much of the city burned. The Crusaders dismantled the Byzantine Empire, establishing a Latin Empire of Constantinople under Count Baldwin of Flanders. Various crusade leaders claimed portions of former Byzantine territory, while the Venetians secured valuable ports and islands that enhanced their commercial dominance in the eastern Mediterranean. However, Byzantine rule continued in several successor states. The most important of these were the Empire of Nicaea in western Anatolia, the Despotate of Epirus in what is now northwestern Greece and Albania, and the Empire of Trebizond along the Black Sea coast. Of these, the Nicaean Empire, ruled by the Lascaris family, positioned itself as the legitimate continuation of Byzantine imperial authority. As the Latin Empire gradually weakened, the Nicaean emperors systematically reclaimed former Byzantine territories in Greece and the Aegean. Finally, in July 1261 CE, a Nicaean force under General Alexios Strategopoulos captured Constantinople through a night attack, restoring the Byzantine capital after 57 years of Latin occupation. Emperor Michael VIII Palaiologos reigned 1259 to 1282 CE, who had recently usurped the Nicaean throne from the young John IV Lascaris, now established himself in Constantinople, founding the Palaiologan dynasty that would rule the restored Byzantine Empire until its final fall in 1453 CE. As our journey continues through the latter centuries of Byzantine history, we will witness this restored empire's struggles against increasingly formidable challenges: territorial fragmentation, economic decline, civil conflicts, and the rising power of the Ottoman Turks. Yet we will also see remarkable cultural and intellectual achievements during this final flowering of Byzantine civilization. But for now, as you float on the gentle currents of historical time, imagine once more the glittering mosaics of Byzantine churches, the solemn processions of purple-robed emperors, the melodious chants of divine liturgy echoing beneath soaring domes, and the patient scribes preserving ancient wisdom in their elegant Greek script. In the streets of Constantinople, amid the aroma of incense and spices, merchants from distant lands exchange silks and gold, ideas and languages, connecting east and west in the marketplace of this extraordinary civilization. As time continued its inevitable flow, and as the restored Byzantine Empire sought to regain its former glory under the Palaiologan dynasty, new challenges and unexpected developments awaited this ancient civilization in its final centuries. As our historical journey continues, we'll now explore Script, Part 3. As our historical journey continues, we'll now explore the final chapters of the Byzantine Empire under the Palaiologan dynasty. This period, spanning from 1261 to 1453 CE, represents both a remarkable cultural renaissance and a time of increasing political fragility for this ancient civilization. The restored Byzantine Empire that Michael VIII Palaiologos established in 1261 was a shadow of its former self. While Constantinople was once again in Byzantine hands, much of the empire's former territory remained under Latin, Bulgarian, Serbian, or Turkish control. The empire now consisted primarily of Constantinople itself, portions of Thrace and Macedonia, scattered holdings in Greece, and some Aegean islands. Emperor Michael VIII faced immediate challenges on multiple fronts. Charles of Anjou, the ambitious brother of the French king Louis IX, had conquered the Kingdom of Sicily and now planned to attack Constantinople to restore the Latin Empire. To counter this threat, Michael pursued a controversial policy of church union with Rome, hoping to secure papal opposition to Charles's plans. At the Council of Lyon in 1274 CE, Byzantine representatives accepted papal primacy and several Catholic theological positions, formally ending the schism between Eastern and Western Christianity. However, this union was deeply unpopular among the Byzantine clergy and population, who had grown increasingly hostile to Latin Christianity after the trauma of the Fourth Crusade. While Michael's ecclesiastical diplomacy helped deter Western attacks, it caused serious internal dissension. His son and successor, Andronikos II Palaiologos, reigned 1282 to 1328 CE, repudiated the union immediately upon taking the throne, prioritizing domestic religious harmony over relations with the West. Militarily weakened and financially strained, the restored empire increasingly relied on diplomacy and commercial relationships to maintain its position. Byzantine rulers made concessions to the Italian maritime republics, particularly Genoa and Venice, granting them favorable trading privileges that undermined the empire's own economic interests. To save money, Andronikos II drastically reduced the Byzantine navy, a decision that left Constantinople vulnerable to maritime threats and diminished Byzantine influence in the Aegean. He also disbanded the empire's standing army, relying instead on unreliable mercenaries and feudal levies. These military economies proved short-sighted as the empire faced new threats, particularly from Turkish emirates in Anatolia. Following the Battle of Manzikert in 1071 CE, Turkish settlement in formerly Byzantine Anatolia had gradually increased. After the Mongol invasions of the mid-13th century disrupted the Seljuk Sultanate of Rum, numerous independent Turkish principalities emerged along the Byzantine frontier. One of these principalities, led by a chief named Osman, would evolve into the Ottoman Empire. Initially a small border state in northwestern Anatolia, the Ottoman Beylik Principality began to expand at Byzantine expense in the early 14th century, capturing important cities like Bursa, 1326 CE, and Nicaea, 1331 CE. Simultaneously, in the Balkans, a resurgent Serbian state under Stefan Dušan, reigned 1331 to 1355 CE, expanded at Byzantine expense, capturing much of Macedonia, Epirus, and Thessaly. By the mid-14th century, Dušan had proclaimed himself Emperor of the Serbs and Romans, directly challenging Byzantine imperial claims. Internal Byzantine politics further complicated the empire's response to these external threats. A bitter civil war erupted in 1321 CE between Emperor Andronikos II and his grandson Andronikos III, lasting until the elder emperor's forced abdication in 1328 CE. Another, more destructive civil war followed in 1341 to 1347 CE after Andronikos III's death, pitting his young son John V against his chief minister John Kantakouzanos. This conflict not only drained Byzantine resources, but provided opportunities for foreign powers to intervene in imperial affairs. Amid these political struggles, the Byzantine Empire was struck by the Black Death, which reached Constantinople in 1347 CE. This devastating pandemic killed perhaps a third of the empire's already diminished population, further weakening its economic and military capacity. By the mid-14th century, the Byzantine Empire had been reduced to a collection of disconnected territories, Constantinople and its immediate surroundings, the city of Thessalonica, and parts of the Chalkidiki Peninsula, the despotate of the Morea in the Peloponnese, and a few Aegean islands. These fragments were increasingly surrounded by expanding Serbian and Ottoman territories. In 1354 CE, the Ottomans established their first permanent foothold in Europe by occupying the Gallipoli Peninsula following an earthquake that damaged Byzantine fortifications. From this bridgehead, they began a systematic conquest of Thrace, gradually encircling Constantinople. As Ottoman power grew, Byzantine emperors increasingly sought Western assistance, offering church union as an inducement. Emperor John V Palaiologos reigned 1341 to 1391 CE with interruptions. Personally traveled to Rome in 1369 CE and converted to Catholicism, but received little concrete aid in return. By the 1370s, the Byzantine Empire had become an Ottoman vassal state, with Emperor John V required to provide military service to the Ottoman Sultan Murad II and sent his son Manuel as a hostage to the Ottoman court. The empire's survival now depended more on Ottoman forbearance than on its own strength. A glimmer of hope appeared in 1402 CE when the Central Asian conqueror Timur Tamerlane defeated and captured Ottoman Sultan Bayezid I at the Battle of Ankara. The resulting Ottoman civil war temporarily relieved pressure on Constantinople and allowed Emperor Manuel II Palaiologos, reigned 1391 to 1425 CE, to recover some territory, including Thessalonica. Manuel II also sought Western support, traveling as far as England and France in 1399 to 1403 CE. While he was received with honor, concrete military assistance remained limited. The bitter memory of the Fourth Crusade and the religious divide between Orthodoxy and Catholicism continued to complicate Byzantine-Western relations. Once the Ottomans recovered from their civil war under Sultan Mehmed I, reigned 1413 to 1421 CE, and especially his successor Murad II, reigned 1421 to 1451 CE, they resumed their expansion at Byzantine expense. Thessalonica, the empire's second city, was captured in 1430 CE after a brief period under Venetian protection. By the reign of the last Byzantine emperor, Constantine XI Palaiologos, reigned 1449 to 1453 CE, the empire consisted of little more than Constantinople itself and the Morea despotate ruled by his brothers. The imperial capital, once a magnificent metropolis of nearly 1 million inhabitants, had declined to perhaps 50,000 people, with many areas within the walls abandoned or converted to agricultural use. In 1451 CE, Mehmed II became Ottoman Sultan at the age of 19. Young, ambitious, and well-educated, Mehmed was determined to capture Constantinople and make it the capital of his expanding empire. Unlike his predecessors, who had been content to maintain the Byzantine Empire as a weak vassal state, Mehmed sought to end the 1,000-year imperial presence in the city. In preparation for the siege, Mehmed constructed a massive fortress called Rumeli Hisara on the European shore of the Bosporus, opposite an earlier Ottoman fortress on the Asian side. These throat cutters, as they were known, allowed the Ottomans to control maritime traffic through the strait, effectively isolating Constantinople from the Black Sea. Mehmed also commissioned enormous bronze cannons from Hungarian engineer Urban, who had initially offered his services to the Byzantines but was turned away due to lack of funds. The largest of these cannons could fire stone balls weighing up to 600 pounds, making them capable of breaching even Constantinople's legendary walls. As Ottoman preparations became clear, Emperor Constantine XI frantically sought Western aid. Pope Nicholas V promised assistance in exchange for the implementation of the Union of Churches, agreed at the Council of Florence in 1439 CE. Despite opposition from many of his subjects, Constantine accepted these terms, and a formal ceremony of union was held in Hagia Sophia on December 12, 1452 CE. However, the promised Western relief was minimal. Genoa contributed a contingent of professional soldiers led by Giovanni Justiniani Longo, and a few hundred volunteers arrived from other parts of Europe, but no major expedition materialized. Many Orthodox Byzantines, following the lead of the monk Gennadios, declared that they would rather see the Sultan's turban in the city than the Latin mitre, reflecting the depth of anti-Western sentiment following the Fourth Crusade. The final siege of Constantinople began on April 6, 1453 CE. The Ottoman forces, numbering perhaps 80,000 men, including regular troops, irregular auxiliaries, and naval forces, completely surrounded the city. The defending Byzantines and their allies, numbered at most 7,000 men, stretched thin along the city's extensive walls. For nearly 2 months, the defenders repelled Ottoman assaults and repaired damage caused by cannon fire. A small group of Genoese and Venetian ships fought their way through the Ottoman fleet to deliver supplies and reinforcements. Emperor Constantine himself supervised the defense, sleeping little and constantly inspecting the walls to maintain morale. On May 29, 1453 CE, after a final spiritual preparation, Mehmed launched an all-out assault on the land walls. Wave after wave of Ottoman troops attacked throughout the night, suffering heavy casualties but gradually wearing down the outnumbered defenders. The decisive moment came when a small group of Ottoman soldiers discovered that a small postern gate, the Kirka Porta, had been left open during a sortie. This allowed them to enter the city between the inner and outer walls. Simultaneously, Justiniani, the Genoese commander, was seriously wounded and carried to a ship for evacuation, demoralizing the defenders. As Ottoman troops poured into the city, Emperor Constantine XI reportedly discarded his imperial insignia and led a final charge against the invaders, dying anonymously among his soldiers. By midday, Constantinople, the capital of Eastern Roman sub-Byzantine civilization for 1,123 years, had fallen to the Ottomans. Sultan Mehmed II, now styled the Conqueror, entered the city in triumph and went directly to Hagia Sophia, ordering its immediate conversion into a mosque. While he allowed his troops 3 days of looting according to military custom, he took measures to limit destruction and soon began efforts to repopulate and rebuild the city as the new Ottoman capital. The Morea Despotate, the last remnant of the Byzantine Empire, held out until 1460 CE before being conquered by the Ottomans. The Empire of Trebizond, a Byzantine successor state on the Black Sea coast that had maintained its independence since the Fourth Crusade, fell in 1461 CE, marking the final end of Byzantine political authority. The fall of Constantinople sent shockwaves throughout Christendom. Pope Nicholas V called for a crusade, though none materialized. The event is often cited as marking the end of the Middle Ages and the beginning of the Renaissance, as many Greek scholars fled to Italy, bringing ancient manuscripts and knowledge that contributed to the revival of classical learning. While the political structure of the Byzantine Empire had come to an end, its cultural, religious, and intellectual legacy endured. The Orthodox Church, now under Ottoman rule, continued to serve as the primary institution, preserving Byzantine traditions and identity for Greeks and other Orthodox peoples. In Russia, which had been converted to Orthodox Christianity through Byzantine influence, religious leaders developed the idea of Moscow as the Third Rome, after Rome and Constantinople, positioning Russia as the heir to Byzantine civilization and defender of orthodoxy. Russian rulers adopted Byzantine imperial symbols, including the double-headed eagle and the title Tsar, Caesar. The Ottomans themselves, while establishing a distinctly Islamic state, absorbed many Byzantine administrative practices and employed Greeks in their civil service. Mehmed II, who spoke Greek and had studied Byzantine history, consciously presented himself as the legitimate successor to the Byzantine emperors, governing a multi-religious empire centered on Constantinople, which became known as Istanbul. Throughout this final period of Byzantine history, despite the empire's political decline, cultural and intellectual life remained remarkably vibrant. The Paleologon era witnessed what some scholars call the Byzantine Renaissance, a flourishing of art, literature, philosophy, and theology. Byzantine artists of this period developed a more emotional, dynamic style, evident in the exquisite frescoes of churches in Constantinople, Thessalonica, and Mistra, the capital of the Morea Despotate. Icons from this era show a new psychological depth and subtlety of expression. In literature, scholars like Theodore Metachites and Nikephoros Gregoras produced works spanning history, astronomy, and philosophy. The mystical theological movement known as Hesychasm, associated with Gregory Palamas, engaged in sophisticated debates about the nature of divine experience and the possibility of directly perceiving divine light through contemplative prayer. Scholars like Gemistos Plethon re-examined and reinterpreted ancient Greek philosophy, particularly Platonism, creating intellectual bridges between Byzantine and Western Renaissance thought. When Plethon attended the Council of Florence in 1439 CE, his lectures on Plato influenced Italian humanists and contributed to the Platonic revival in Western Europe. These intellectual developments reveal a civilization that, even in its final century, continued to engage creatively with its classical heritage and produce original contributions to human thought and artistic expression. As we reach the conclusion of our journey through Byzantine history, let us reflect on the remarkable achievement that this civilization represents. For more than 1,000 years after the Western Roman Empire had fallen, the Byzantines maintained and transformed the Roman imperial tradition, blending it with Greek culture and Christian faith to create something distinctively their own. The Byzantines preserved much of classical Greek and Roman literature that would otherwise have been lost to history. Their legal codes influenced the development of law throughout Europe and the Middle East. Their artistic traditions shaped the visual cultures of Orthodox Slavic nations, as well as influencing Western medieval and Renaissance art. Their architectural innovations, particularly in dome construction, can be seen in buildings around the world. The Byzantine Empire served as a bulwark protecting Europe from various Eastern threats for centuries, absorbing invasions that might otherwise have struck deeper into the continent. It acted as a cultural bridge between East and West, transmitting ideas, technologies, and artistic styles in both directions. The story of Byzantium is not just one of emperors and battles, but of a society that valued learning, beauty, and spiritual contemplation even amid constant challenges to its existence. From the glittering mosaics of Ravenna to the soaring dome of Hagia Sophia, from the sophisticated diplomacy of imperial courts to the patient work of monastic scribes preserving ancient wisdom, the Byzantine legacy continues to enrich our world. As you drift toward sleep, imagine once more the Byzantine world in its splendor, the imperial processions along the Mese, Constantinople's main avenue, the sublime chanting of the divine liturgy beneath the dome of Hagia Sophia, the glint of sunlight on golden mosaics, the soft rustle of silk robes in imperial apartments, the patient work of artists creating icons with delicate brushstrokes, the scribes carefully copying ancient texts, the debates of scholars and theologians in the halls of learning, the busy harbors where ships from distant lands exchange goods and ideas. This civilization, for all its imperfections, represented one of humanity's great achievements, a society that endured for a millennium, preserving and transforming a precious cultural heritage while creating its own distinctive contributions to human civilization. As the final echoes of Byzantine history fade into the gentle rhythms of your deepening sleep, remember that the legacy of this remarkable civilization continues to shape our world in countless ways, a golden thread connecting us to distant centuries of human creativity, faith, and resilience. As our journey through the Byzantine Empire comes to a close, I hope this exploration has helped ease your mind and guide you toward peaceful sleep. History's gentle rhythms continue to flow, just as they have for countless generations before us. If this boring historical narrative has helped you find rest tonight, remember that your like and subscription directly support our mission to create more of these sleep-inducing histories. Your engagement helps other insomniacs discover these narratives too. What historical period would you like us to explore next? Leave your suggestions in the comments below. Thank you for joining us on this historical journey. Until next time, good night and pleasant dreams.